We touched on Alex Honnold for a second there, and I would like to shift and look at his interview, the training chapter of his interview for a minute, as I found it interesting. He said his struggle was finger strength relative to his peers. Here, take a listen to what he had to say there.
Yeah. By pretty much any metric of finger strength, I underperform relative to my peers, which which I manage with good technique, good footwork, like everything else, basically like good execution. Like I would say I'm a pretty good climber in general, but I'm not that strong of a climber. Certainly not relative to the level at which I climb. Physical training and climbing is always a bit of an uphill battle. Like that is a bit of a struggle.
How healthy is it for us to compare our finger strength to our peers? How helpful is that, and how much do you see of that?
It's hard not to. It's hard not to make assumptions based on numbers that you should be able to do this compared to them, for sure. One of the things that I'm interested in that is hard to quantify is like leverage. And so that's dangerous because different athletes have different leverage. And if you have really good leverage, you're going to be able to create a lot of torque. Your numbers are going to be really big. If you don't have as good leverage, you're not going to be able to produce those same numbers. So
This is where the tendon attaches to the bone in the finger. You've done some posts on this, I think, right?
yeah. So it happens in the fingers, but it happens in every other tendon in your body too. And so it's really defines the athlete's, maybe we could say, climbing style. Like Allison's climbing style is very much straight arm, hanging on her fingers because she is the strongest human on the planet in that position. But if you put her in a really tight position, she cannot sustain that same force, right? And so that certainly defines how people, learn to climb and become competent at the skill, right? That's why it's never going to be the same between two people. But when it comes to Alex, like I have no doubt in my mind that he will be able to climb 515. And really it comes down to like it just hasn't been a focus. And so if you look at him compared to just you mentioned Jonathan Segris, John Segris is all about pushing himself and his personal limits. Even though everyone outside of climbing is blown away by what Alex Honnold does, for Alex Honnold, that's incredibly like probably 75% intensity of what his real potential is. But it doesn't seem to me, at least, and I don't know him, that he's really tried to push his single pitch, you know, uh, level of like sports performance, where his big objectives are mind blowing how good they are, right? And so that's another volume thing too. He spends the majority of his time climbing at 75%. He does a ton of it, or 80% even, right? But until he's willing to really back off all of that volume and spend most of his time doing single pitches at his limit, he won't get there. But it'll be really easy to do when he wants to, right? Because he has such a good skill development.
Right. Yeah, and he has said as much. He basically just loves climbing. He wants to get a
Yeah,
ton of
he just
mileage
has
in.
to
He's
stop
probably got a
climbing.
resting heart rate of 30 or something like that. I mean, he just puts in thousands of feet of climbing in a day where, boulderers, of course, are on the far other end of that spectrum. Great. Well, one more quote from Honnold, and we'll move on here. I want to get your thoughts on this. He said,
If you can improve by 1 grade a year, which doesn't really feel like that much if you're training consistently, within a decade, you're climbing the hardest routes in the world. Which is like kind of a crazy way to think about it. But like, I mean, if you keep training and you go up a grade a year, by the next decade, you'll be climbing literally the hardest routes in the world.
is that true? Can we improve by 1 grade a year?
I think on paper that sounds great. I think it depends on how much access or time you have to spend climbing on rock. If that was a gym, if it was like for someone like yourself or myself, like, well, I guess I can go climb in bouldering early in the morning outside, but for people that don't have 3, 4 days a week to practice outside, I would say that's a different, it's much more challenging for them to satisfy that particular statement. If it was in the gym, that's maybe a bit more reasonable, right? But one of the hard things about what people do with their training is there's so many ideas coming at them at one time. And, one thing that I'm probably guilty of doing this and hopefully not too much with Instagram is trying to be, thoughtful about how people use their training interventions. But if we're changing what we're doing too often, sometimes that kind of defeats the whole slow, gradual build, right? We have too much variation in the training, also can kind of degrade that. So I mean, I like the idea of, practicing and becoming more tactical and climbing a grade harder every year, but I don't see that happening for the average individual.
Are there certain plateaus that you see because you are a data guy? Are there certain grades or plateau ceilings that people hit, or is it totally individualized?
Like it seems like 512, mid 512, 512 plus is for sure a plateau grade. Also seems like V6, V7 also plateau grade, right? And in those cases, those are the people that plateau. Most people will climb to 512 plus or V7 and they'll plateau. And that's when they are like, okay, I need to make my fingers stronger. That's something that I think, I see quite often and I'm sure other coaches do. And that's when simply adding in some more intentional finger loading, we can even say that over finger boarding, they'll overcome that plateau. And that's another, I see it as another habit forming thing where spending too much time climbing in a gym can kind of keep that upper level kind of plateaued for longer because you kind of get kind of stuck in the rut of doing the same thing all the time at the gym, which is really easy to do. And I did that for, 10 years of my life, just climbing the same grade at the gym until someone, was like, let's try this. And you're like, oh, I can't climb that. And then they climb that and you can climb like them. You're like, wow, I'm climbing 2 grades harder too. So it's really easy to get kind of trapped in your own head too about it.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation there with Dr. Tyler Nelson. This dude knows his stuff about finger strength and finger power, don't you think? If you want to learn more about this kind of thing, if you're like a serious climber, if you want to train hard, recover faster, and perform at your best, and I think we all do, right? There's a ton more with Dr. Tyler Nelson over on the Patreon page that's exclusive for patrons. This is something that he's had me doing lately. I'm using a tin deck and this unlevel edge, and it's allowing me to recruit far more in my fingers than if I were just hanging on a board. We talk all about that and so much else in his Pro Clinic episode. It's over an hour long, and you get access to that, but also all the other Pro Clinics that are over on Patreon. Ravioli Biceps on Moonboard, Drew Mack on Endurance, Favia Dubak on Core Strength, Jordan Cannon on Big Wall Tactics, Natasha Barnes on training power through weightlifting. All of those Pro Clinics and more for like $5 a month. So that's how I keep the lights on here in the basement podcast /YouTube /utility closet. So I really appreciate your support to help me continue to put out content like this. But also I'm giving back. I'm giving you access to those Pro Clinics and so much else over there on Patreon. So check it out, and you can quit anytime. There's no obligation. I hope you love it. You can start right there by checking out the Pro Clinic with Dr. Tyler Nelson. Get those fingers strong.